Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with part 17, the Epic of Gessar Khan, from the Adepts in the Eastern Esoteric Tradition by Manly Palmer Hall, part 2, the Arhats of Buddhism. The Epic of Gessar Khan. Although the indigenous literature of Tibet is dominantly religious, there are several cycles of hero myths that reveal in great detail the cultural tradition of the peoples of the Altai-Himalayan zone. These semi-historical sagas are important not only as records of old times, but as veiled accounts of the esoteric institutions, systems, and practices of Northern Asia. The inhabitants of Tibet have no class of literary production analogous to Occidental fiction. In fact, they have no appreciation for the concept of stories written simply to amuse or entertain. Their attitude toward the Occidental novel is direct, if not especially imaginative. If it is not true, it is not worth reading. In most matters, Tibetans simply refuse to pay the price of Western progress. They will accept from outside only such commodities and conveniences as can be assimilated without in any way altering or distorting the traditional way of life. Thus, they combine the most abstract metaphysical doctrines with an intensely materialistic realism. But this very realism drifts easily and naturally into an elaborate and involved fantasy. To the Tibetan mind, Gessar of Ling is both a person and a personification. None doubts that he actually lived nearly 1200 years ago, that he still lives in a paradisiacal court, and that he will come again to cleanse Lhasa of the corruptions of a decadent priesthood. It is doubtful whether the Gessar cycle originated in Tibet or Mongolia. The bards of both peoples claim him as their own. The poems themselves, however, seem to favor the Tibetans, and efforts to interpret the fabulous geography of the narratives support, at least in part, this conclusion. Such great epics as the Iliad, the Ramayana, the Sigurd Saga, and the Gessar Khan are remarkably similar in construction and method of unfoldment, and incline to the suspicion that these similarities are not entirely accidental. Some have suggested that an early Greek or Roman influence can be traced in the Gessar cycle. Even the name of the hero is reminiscent of the Latin title Caesar. At least two distinct forms of the legends of Gessar Khan are known to exist: the Tibetan and the Mongolian. While the storyline is much the same, there are enough differences, especially psychological, to indicate that each version has a long traditional background. Unfortunately, the complete cycle is not available in English, and the task of assembling the material from native sources presents almost insurmountable difficulties. It is doubtful if any one Tibetan bard or his Mongolian equivalent is in possession of the complete epic. The recitations of the Gessar poems are best described as interminable. One brief episode may require several weeks in the telling. This is due to the elaborate and highly traditional manner of involving the smallest fragment of the action of the story in an elaborate structure of mystical, religious, philosophical, and symbolical speculation. Madame Alexandra David Neal, with the assistance of the Lama Yongden, has given us an excellent summary of the Tibetan version under the title The Superhuman Life of Gessar of Ling. She made use of scarce manuscripts and listened for weeks to the native poets in preparing her digest of the legend. As far as she was able to learn, no printed version of the Tibetan poem of the Gessar epic existed. She notes that inquiry among qualified Tibetans, including the present king of Ling, revealed no trace or indication that the work exists in a printed edition. Sir Charles Bell, for many years British political representative in Tibet, stated definitely after elaborate questioning at Lhasa that the legend of Gessar Khan had never been printed, and that even manuscripts are quite rare. A printed version of the Mongolian legend of Gessar appeared in Peking in 1716 during the reign and under the authority of the Emperor Kanghai. In 1836, the Imperial Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg authorized one of its members, Isaac Jacob Schmidt, to prepare a new edition in the Mongolian language from the earlier text. And 3 years later, a German translation was published under the title Die Taten Bogoda Gessar Chans. In his analysis of the text, Professor Schmidt was also of the opinion that the legend was of Tibetan origin. The Mongolian form of this hero saga was the basis of an English text published in 1927 under the title Gessar Khan by Ida Zeitlin. In this work, credit is also given to the so-called Little Gessar, translated from a Kalmush original published in Riga in 1804. Although it is usual to refer to Gessar Khan as a mythological hero, it seems likely that he flourished in the 7th or 8th century of the Christian era, possibly at the one time that Tibet made a bid for recognition as a world power. The peoples of this now remote and feeble country once conquered a considerable part of China and even sent an expedition as far as Persia. For our purposes, the historicity of the account is of slight importance, our principal concern being its place in the literature of the adept tradition. Like the Arthurian cycle and the legends of Charlemagne and Roland, the Epic of Gessar is a thinly veiled account of the initiate priest-king. He is the warrior adept who is to conquer the world under the banner of Shambhala. As Merlin the magician played a vital part in the advent of King Arthur and was his spiritual mentor, so in the legend of Gessar, one of the greatest of the Asiatic adepts, the Guru Rinpoche Ugyen Pema Yungnis, is the guide and spiritual counselor. We already know this precious spiritual master under his Sanskrit name, Padma Sambhava. In some parts of the Gessar legend, the hero king appears as little more than a tulpa, that is a mental phantom created by will and yoga. In other places, Gessar assumes the attributes of a tulku. In Tibetan transcendentalism, a tulku is an emanation or avatar of a deity. This emanation can take flesh and be born, but the spiritual being itself remains apart from its projected personality. We do not need to proceed far with these speculations for the metaphysical importance of the legend to become apparent. In both the Tibetan and Mongolian versions, Gessar is the embodiment, projection, or phantom form of one of the bodhisattvas, the enlightened lords of compassion, who take upon themselves the illusion of matter for the redemption of mankind. In the period during which the Gessar saga was developing, it appears that Padmasambhava had already departed from Tibet and had taken up his residence in the copper-colored mountain of Lanka, Ceylon. He communicated with the hero king of Ling by means of a magical projection, appearing in visions and dreams. From this circumstance, we may infer that Padmasambhava was incorporated into the legend after the end of the 8th century. It is not at all certain that the Epic of Gessar of Ling belongs to the Buddhistic period in Tibet. The stories may be much older and belong to the pseudo-historical fantasies of the Bon Po, the indigenous religious mysteries of this forbidden land. It is unnecessary to explore here the various details of the Gessar legend. It is sufficient to point out that in both the Mongolian and Tibetan, Kham, versions, the hero emerges as the typical defender of the faith, protector of the weak, and avenger of wrongs. He is a trans-Himalayan Lohengrin, a shining figure whose peculiar symbol was an arrow. As the Swan Knight was the ambassador of the mystic fraternity of Mont Salvar and a servant of the San Grail, so Gessar Khan appears as the emissary of the secret brotherhood of the Kalachakra mysteries, celebrated in Chang Shambhala. Like the Egyptian Horus, he is the destroyer of evil, and in the popular mind of the nations which venerate his memory, he shares many of the attributes of the Maitreya Buddha, the Messiah to come. Gessar Khan will enter Lhasa at the head of his armies and will purify the Lamaist doctrines and temples. He will drive the money changers from the shrines and restore the resplendent doctrine. At the same time, he will drive foreigners from the land, and under his rule, Tibet will rise victorious and attain supremacy among the nations of the world. Those who fought with him in the past, his gallant generals and his faithful followers, wait in paradise to be reborn with him. His return is promised by ancient oracles, prophecies, and omens, and today throughout northern Asia, there is an increasing belief that his advent is near. Like most culture heroes, Gessar Khan attained victory over his adversaries, many of whom were demons under various guises by means of magical powers associated with the esoteric practices of the Tantra and Kalachakra schools. The hero was immaculately conceived as the result of his mother drinking holy water from a cup of yellow jade, ornamented with the 8 propitious emblems of Buddhism. The Annunciation was accompanied by miraculous signs and the appearance of a vast assemblage of divinities. Gessar was born with 3 eyes, but because the one in the center of his forehead was the cause of much wonderment and comment, his mother closed it with the pressure of her thumb. A tiny lid-like mark, however, remained. by which the hero could be recognized by those who had the skill to examine closely. As is usual in such stories, a wicked and jealous prince sought to destroy the infant through fear that the divine child might sometime usurp the kingdom. Gessar also includes a certain inconsistent factor nearly always present in the culture hero. Though divine, destined to accomplish a world mission, and equipped with extraordinary magical skill, he passed through numerous misfortunes which he was unable to prevent, and had to depend upon the wisdom of the wizard Guru Padmasambhava for guidance in outstanding emergencies. Like Siegfried in the House of the Gibichung, he was given a draught of forgetfulness by his own unfaithful wife, and few of his affairs ran smoothly. The folk hero is always vulnerable but ultimately victorious, and Gessar is no exception to the general rule. He overcomes giants, despots, and supernatural monsters, but his peculiar skill in conjuring into existence phantoms to do his bidding reveals a pattern of sorceries distinctly Asiatic. In the calm version of the legend, Gessar did not die by mortal hand, but, having fulfilled his mission, made use of the high secrets of the Kala Chakra to accomplish the instantaneous dissolution of his own body. While in meditation with 4 of his companions, whose destinies were linked with his own, they uttered secret words of power and vanished together, leaving only their empty robes in the midst of circles of radiant light. It will be obvious that Gessar Khan is a type of the adept king. His story is a history of power. Even to recite it is to invoke the very presence of Gessar himself. As Pythagoras recited lines of the Iliad in treating the sick, so the songs of the Gessar epic are walls of protection. Travelers wandering through brigand-infested regions chant the verses, convinced that no enemy can disturb them while they sing of the hero of the world. Many of the choicest secrets of high Asian esotericism are incorporated in this Tibetan epic. It is regrettable that Madame David Neal did not see fit to include the philosophical elements of the legend in her translation, but, as she pointed out, the work in its complete form would be of such length and complexity as to discourage the most enthusiastic editor. While it is not fair to say that the story of Gessar Khan is the key to the mystery of Shambhala, there can be no doubt that the 2 streams of tradition are intimately associated. The late Nicholas Roerich indicated that the legendary personality of Gessar Khan stands side by side with that of Kulika Manjusri Kirti, the adept ruler of Changshambhala. Professor Roerich writes, "In Tibet we had occasion to convince ourselves of this legend. We were told of Gessar Khan's palace in Kham, where the swords of his army are collected, serving as beams for his palace. Gessar Khan is armed with arrows of thunder, and the predestined army is soon ready to come out of the sacred land for the salvation of mankind." Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.